The story opens in a bright, sunlit forest where two children are playfully fighting with sticks. One child swings his stick, pretending to cast magic like a wizard, while the other plays the role of a monster. The game gets too real when the first kid smacks his friend on the head. The injured child cries out, complaining that monsters are always supposed to lose, to which his friend laughs and decides he wants to be a wizard instead. An old man with a long white beard, Grandpa Rabus, walks up and warmly comments on their morning energy. The children ask him what they need to do to become real wizards. Rabus completely crushes their dreams, explaining that wizards are the absolute apex of humanity, acting as nobles and knights who rule society. He tells them that magic is a mysterious power inherited from elite ancestors, meaning commoners like them have no chance. A nearby villager overhears and scolds the elder for ruining the kids' hopes. Their conversation quickly shifts to a dark rumor, and Rabus confirms that a terrifying monster has appeared. A man named Rop spotted the beast at the village entrance the night before. It is described as a massive leopard, the size of a house, covered entirely in pitch-black shadow. Rabus calms the panicked villager by explaining that the village chief has already traveled to the city to hire a real wizard to kill the beast. After warning everyone to stay out of the forest, Rabus thinks to himself that fighting a monster without magic is basically suicide. He then realizes someone isolated might not know about the danger: the lonely shepherd up on Hisaril Hill. The scene cuts to a wide, peaceful shot of a lush green pasture, a small barn, and a flock of grazing sheep. Lying in the grass is Turan, the young shepherd. Staring up at the sky, he groans about how incredibly boring his life is, seeing the exact same scenery day after day. He even jokes that he's going to forget how to talk. His peace is ruined when Elder Rabus arrives, standing over him and calling him a pathetic brat for slacking off. Turan casually tells the old man to move because he is blocking the sunlight, criticizing his lack of manners. The tension between them instantly spikes. Rabus asks if Turan is still holding a grudge over a past incident. Turan coldly reminds the elder of the time his mother died, and Rabus tried to quietly steal their sheep to make them shared village property. Turan tells the old man to say what he needs to say and get lost, causing Rabus to completely lose his temper. Regaining his composure, Rabus delivers the chilling news about the house-sized leopard. Rabus questions Turan's lack of fear, warning him that a wizard has been called and he needs to be extremely careful out on the open hill. When Rabus claims he came out of worry for Turan, the young man smirks and tells him to admit he only cares about the sheep. Turan delivers a final insult, telling the old man his breath stinks so badly his nose might rot. As Rabus walks away, Turan thinks about the monster, knowing there were yet that they are beasts that wield magical power just like human wizards. He actually seems excited at the thought of finally seeing a real wizard in person. However, he doubts a backwater village chief could hire anyone truly powerful. While walking, Turan suddenly stops dead in his tracks. He catches the sharp scent of blood in the air. Following the smell into the dark woods, his eyes widen in shock. The panels reveal a massive, terrifying monster claw resting heavily on the ground. Turan realizes the source of the blood is Rabus, the very man who just warned him to be careful. Looking at the gruesome scene, Turan notes that the massive wounds could only be made by the monster. The village's false hope. The story briefly cuts to a terrified child in the village eating a meal with an adult. The kid asks if it is true that adults cannot beat the beast. The man confirms that the monster is insanely strong, and if a normal human tried to fight it, not even their bones would be left to collect. The man calms the crying child by promising that the summoned wizard will save them. He builds up the absolute myth of wizards, claiming they are great beings of magic who can punish and kill monsters with a single spoken word. Back in the dark forest, Turan stands completely alone, face to face with the gigantic shadow beast. He tries speaking a command to stop the creature, but it completely ignores him. Realizing words cannot control it, Turan sighs and decides that a shepherd must simply do what a shepherd does. He grips his wooden staff, and the atmosphere shifts drastically. In a stunning display of power, Turan begins to chant real magic. He commands his weapon to pierce through, become faster and harden. The panels explode with intense visual energy as Turan launches a devastating, high-speed magical attack directly at the beast. Focusing his lethal strike, Turan states calmly that he is aiming right for the head, noting this is his very first time using this magic on a monster. The massive and terrifying head of the monster is completely blown apart, leaving the giant body slumped in the dirt. Turan stands victorious, his face and clothes totally splattered with blood. Instead of celebrating his incredible power, he looks annoyed, wondering if he should drag the giant carcass into a valley, complaining that the village bastards really put him to work. As he stands there, his mind drifts back to a memory from 8 years ago, when he was just 10 years old. That was the day he first realized he had special abilities. We see a flashback of a young Turan excitedly making giant wooden logs fly through the air using fire and wind magic. But his mother was not proud. In fact, she screamed at him to stop. Turan remembers this as the first and last time his mother ever got truly mad at him. She sat him down and made him swear a serious promise. He must never use his power in front of other people. Guys, let me ask you a question. If you suddenly discovered you had overpowered magic, could you hide it for 8 years? Let me know in the comments. The cruel reality of wizards. His mother then explains the dark truth of their world. She tells him that while all magic users are called wizards, there is a massive difference between nobles and knights. Nobles are the pure descendants of divine beings called Freyans who came down to save humanity. Knights, on the other hand, are descendants of nobles whose blood mixed with ordinary humans. Turan inherited his magic from his father, who was a knight. His mother warns him that outside their quiet town, evil nobles treat knights like slaves and dogs. She explains that a noble might treat a knight like family one day, but they will gladly sell them or sacrifice them the moment it becomes necessary. She tells young Turan that if anyone, especially other wizards, finds out about his powers, they will separate him from her and turn him into a disposable weapon. She even gives him a chilling warning: to keep his secret safe, he might even have to kill people. Back in the present, Turan confirms he has kept this promise for 8 straight years, having no desire to reveal himself or leave his mountain. But his peaceful life is interrupted by loud banging on his door. A group of angry villagers has arrived, shouting for him to come out. They immediately accuse Turan of hurting Elder Rabus and throwing the old man to the monsters to be eaten. Turan instantly figures out their cowardly plan. The oldest man in the village died alone because the young men were too terrified to go fight the monster. Now they are using Turan as a scapegoat, taking the easiest way out to shift the blame away from their own cowardice. Honestly, guys, the audacity of these villagers is insane. What would you do if a whole town tried to frame you for something you did not do? Instead of arguing, Turan realizes how convenient magic truly is. He does not need to start a massive fire to win. By simply wishing strongly and using a little mana, he casts a subtle spell to make the villagers trip and fall over. He controls his power perfectly, so it is not obvious he is using magic, doing just enough damage to beat them up without killing them. He decides to give them a proper whooping so they stop bothering him, but keeps them alive so he can still trade with them later. Just as he finishes handling the villagers, there is another heavy knock at the door. Turan assumes the idiots are back for more, but when he opens the door, he finds a mysterious traveler with a sword. The traveler apologizes for the intrusion, asking for an inn. Since the town is tiny and rarely gets tourists, Turan invites the man inside and shares a huge feast with him. During the meal, the traveler points out that Turan has incredibly good manners for a rural shepherd who has never left the hill. Turan softly explains that his mother taught him well before she passed away from an illness a few years ago. But the mood suddenly shifts. The traveler reveals why he came to this country town. He was hired to take care of a monster puma. Looking dead at Turan, the traveler declares that he is the wizard summoned by the village elder. Turan plays it cool, but the wizard is already suspicious. The wizard states that he can sense a monster in the area, but he cannot see one. Furthermore, he finds it incredibly weird that Turan knows about the monster, but is completely calm instead of running away in terror. The wizard glares at the young shepherd and demands to know who Turan really is, noting he is far too brave for a simple country boy. Everyone. The tension is literally through the roof right now. Turan staring down the traveling wizard, Kjorn. Turan's mind immediately goes to a dark place, seriously contemplating if he will have to kill this man just to protect his secret identity as a wizard. But then Kjorn breaks the heavy silence. He apologizes for flustering Turan, admitting that he just told a bad joke and took the teasing way too far. Kjorn formally introduces himself as a wanderer. Guys, drop comment right now. Did you honestly think Turan was going to end him right there in the living room? Turan introduces himself as an 18-year-old shepherd. Kjorn casually mentions that he is actually 75 years old. Kjorn explains that wizards age much slower and live way longer than ordinary people, which is why he looks so young. Kjorn reveals he served the powerful Arabian family for 60 years before leaving to freely roam the world in his later years. They end up talking entirely through the night. Turan is genuinely surprised by how comfortable and enjoyable the conversation is. He realizes Kjorn is a truly good person, which completely shatters Turan's previous belief that all knights are just emotionless hunting dogs used by arrogant nobles. When morning finally comes, Kjorn leaves an Arabian silver coin to pay for the meal and heads out to hunt the monster, promising he might drop by again. Out in the dense forest, Kjorn easily finds the physical traces of the battle, but the monster's presence is completely gone. He wonders if another wizard already hunted it down. But suddenly, a terrifying entity appears before him, a monster's wraith. Kjorn realizes the horrifying truth. If a monster is killed and its mana isn't properly absorbed or dispersed, the corpse transforms into this nightmare. He quickly deduces that whoever killed the leopard was incredibly powerful, because a novice knight could never defeat something like this in the first place. The wraith is so aggressively strong that it instantly nullifies Kjorn's magic, showing that its mana is vastly superior to his own. Have you guys ever faced a boss in a video game that just completely countered your best moves? That is exactly how Kjorn is feeling right now. The wraith vanishes into thin air to counter Kjorn's magic, leaving the veteran knight completely cornered. Kjorn accepts that this is a threat only a noble-level wizard could handle, but he refuses to die quietly without a fight. He concentrates every last drop of his remaining mana into his hand for a desperate, final strike. But right as the wraith lunges for the kill, Turan suddenly appears out of nowhere and blocks the devastating attack with his simple wooden staff. Kjorn is completely shocked to discover that the young shepherd is actually a wizard. Kjorn asks why Turan didn't just walk away and let him die, especially since a wizard with his skills could live comfortably and make tons of money anywhere else. Kjorn firmly believes that wizards should use their God-given power to protect powerless commoners, though he admits not everyone thinks that way. Panicking, Kjorn warns Turan that this monster is way out of their league and commands him to run to the village to help evacuate it while Kjorn sacrifices himself to hold the line. But Turan stays completely calm. He casually remarks that if his previous attack landed just now, he thinks he will be perfectly fine. Kjorn's mind is absolutely blown, realizing that Turan's earlier strike wasn't even close to his full strength. Kjorn watches in absolute awe, realizing this young knight hiding in the remote mountains might just be the beginning of a legend who will turn the entire world upside down. Turan steps forward, confidently stating that he is curious to test his own limits too. Turan stepping up to face the terrifying wraith, stating he is curious about his own limits. Kjorn panics and yells that he will not allow it, warning Turan that the wraith is way too tough and they need to join forces. But Kjorn quickly realizes a harsh truth. He could not even react to the monster's last attack, meaning he would only get in the way. Instead of fighting, Kjorn decides his only role now is to help Turan's massive talent bloom. Turan tries hitting the wraith, but his physical attacks do absolutely nothing. Kjorn shouts that you cannot kill a wraith with physical strikes and tells him to use fire or lightning. Kjorn is absolutely baffled, realizing Turan does not even know the most basic wizard common sense, like establishing causality to apply magic to another living being. He figures out that Turan must have been the one to kill the monster earlier, leaving it alone to become a wraith because he has never absorbed mana in his entire life. Guys, imagine having noble-level power but zero basic training. What would you even do? Let me know in the comments. Acting as an impromptu mentor, Kjorn yells at Turan to make a fire and shoot it. Kjorn knows that while making fire is easy for a wizard, actually controlling it requires separate, intense training. But to Kjorn's absolute shock, Turan generates and controls a massive blast of fire immediately. Turan blasts the wraith, and Kjorn instructs him to keep his mind focused and keep pouring mana into the flames so they do not go out. He tells Turan he has to burn everything about the wraith away. In a massive explosion of green flames, the wraith is completely destroyed. Kjorn is left in awe, realizing this mountain shepherd just single-handedly took down an absurdly strong wraith that requires noble-class power to defeat. To make sure the monster does not come back, Kjorn teaches Turan how to absorb its mana, telling him to imagine draining the energy into himself. He even mentions it will feel like some sort of pleasure. Have you ever leveled up in a game and felt that instant stat boost? That is basically what Turan just experienced. After the fight, Kjorn's entire attitude changes. Realizing that Turan's innate potential is in a completely different league, Kjorn formally bows and apologizes for his previous rudeness. He respectfully asks which noble house Turan belongs to. Turan is uncomfortable and insists he is just a shepherd who does not even know his father, explaining that hiding his identity was his mother's dying request. She warned him that if nobles found out he was a wizard, they would just use him and throw him away. Kiorn admits she was wise. He opens up about a massive war 20 years ago between the Great House of Zahar and the House of Arabian, which Kiorn served. Kiorn reveals a tragic backstory. Out of roughly 3,000 Arabian knights, more than 900 died. He lost his friend Denver, his teacher Hartman, and most tragically, his beloved wife and son. They were all massacred by House Zahar, leaving Kiorn as the sole survivor of his family. It is a heartbreaking moment that proves Turan's mother was absolutely right about how easily a knight's life can vanish. Drop an F in the chat for Kiorn's family, guys. That is rough. The shocking bloodline. However, Kiorn points out one thing she was wrong about. Turan's aptitude. Kiorn considers himself a highly skilled knight, yet Turan easily destroyed a monster he could not even scratch. Kiorn declares that Turan is at least an upper-tier noble in terms of power, explaining that on rare occasions, a noble-class child is born to knight parents. Kiorn then asks Turan if he has any outstanding abilities that do not require magic, explaining that bloodline abilities separate nobles from knights. Turan casually mentions he has a very good sense of smell and is great at throwing stones. Kiorn freezes. While throwing weapons is an Arabian trait, an exceptionally good sense of smell is a specific bloodline ability. In the final jaw-dropping panels, Kiorn realizes exactly which house Turan's abilities resemble. It is the great house known as the Pursuers or Hunters. Guys, Turan's bloodline traces back to House Zahar, the exact same house that fought the war with House Arabian. Turan belongs to the great House Zahar, the very same noble family that massacred Kiorn's family. Turan is absolutely stunned. He swallows hard, wondering what he should say or if he should apologize. But at the same time, he thinks it is strange to apologize for the actions of relatives he has never even met. Kiorn notices Turan panicking and quickly tells him to stop making such a worried expression. Kiorn proves what an incredible person he is by explaining that this is an adult's situation. He tells Turan that if they try to wash blood with blood, the fighting will simply never end. Kiorn even hopes that because Turan has such a good heart, if he ever joins the Zahar family and rises to a high position, he might actually be the one to prevent another terrible war. Guys, let me ask you, would you be able to forgive the descendant of your worst enemy like Kiorn just did? Let me know in the comments. Turan decides he is finally going to leave the mountain, but only after he helps Kiorn heal. While they wait, Kiorn decides to act as a mentor and teaches Turan the absolute fundamentals of magic. He explains that to use magic, you need mana, which is often called the key to omnipotence. But Kiorn breaks down the difficulty of magic into three main rules: bloodline, affinity, and causality. Bloodline is the power you are born with, which lets some nobles naturally do things like heal wounds. Affinity means it is easier to do things you're already familiar with, which is why Turan could throw a fireball so easily since he is used to throwing rocks. But causality is the most important. Kiorn explains that you cannot just use mana to instantly wish someone dead. You have to provide a cause of death, like creating a flame and shooting it to do the damage. Turan realizes he understands this perfectly, joking that he could have been a magic scholar. Kiorn then reveals that the Zahar bloodline has incredibly special magic, focused entirely on stealth and tracking. He tells Turan to try it out. Turan focuses his mana, wishing that neither his sound nor his smell could be detected. In an instant, Turan completely vanishes. Kiorn is left standing there, admitting that during the war, the Arabian Knights feared this exact ability more than anything else. But since he trusts Turan's character, Kiorn decides to teach him even more magic training methods. Guys, imagine having noble-level firepower and the ability to turn completely invisible. What is the first thing you would do with that power? Tell me down below. Eventually, it is time to leave. Turan goes to the village and completely strong-arms the cowardly village chief, forcing him to buy the sheep at a fair price, or else Turan will just release them all into the wild. The village chief is too terrified to argue and gives in immediately. After securing his funds, Turan and Kiorn share a quiet, respectful goodbye. As Kiorn walks away, the narration reveals a heartbreaking truth. Even though Turan had a loving mother, he had always secretly yearned for a father figure. He realized that the reason he enjoyed Kiorn's company so much was because the veteran knight was exactly the kind of man Turan wanted to become. The story then cuts to Turan walking completely alone through a massive, empty wasteland. He spots a group of men resting on the road and assumes they are just traveling merchants. Turan politely approaches them and asks for directions to the nearest city, Mirai. The men give him the directions, but right as Turan turns to leave, the mood instantly shifts. The men block his path and demand that he hand over his bags and strip down his cloak. They reveal themselves to be ruthless bandits, casually mentioning that this is a wasteland where no one would care if someone ended up dead. They threaten to kill him right there so they can take his belongings without making a mess. But Turan does not panic. He just stares at these men who kill innocent people for money. Instead of being scared, Turan gets a dark look in his eyes and calmly says that he will just have to use them for practice. Turan standing fearlessly in front of the ruthless bandits. He calmly tells them that he is going to use them for magic practice. The bandits completely burst out laughing, calling him a lunatic and mocking him for pretending to be a wizard. But they are about to learn a terrifying lesson. Turan pulls out his water flask and uses his magic to shape the water into a razor-sharp ice dart. He then realizes that generating a massive windstorm out of nowhere takes way too much mana, but if he shapes the wind directly in his hand and amplifies it, it is incredibly efficient. With a single explosive motion, he fires the ice dart using the concentrated wind. It absolutely obliterates one of the bandits in a split second. Turan stands there completely unfazed, noting that honestly, just throwing stones with his sling feels a bit faster and stronger. Guys, let me ask you, if you had overwhelming magic powers, would you use bandits as target practice too? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The remaining bandits immediately drop their weapons and fall to their knees, sweating and shaking in pure terror. They beg for their lives, crying that they did not know he was a real wizard and offering him anything he wants. Turan looks down at them and asks one simple question: why did they target him without a plan? The terrified bandit confesses that because Turan politely bowed and greeted them earlier, they assumed he was just a weak, ordinary person. Turan calmly thanks the bandit for teaching him a useful lesson about how the world works. The bandit desperately asks if Turan will spare his life, but Turan flashes back to Kjorn's strict warning. Kjorn told him to never show mercy to scum who kill for profit, because a life spared out of pity today could result in the deaths of 10 innocent people tomorrow. Taking this dark lesson to heart, Turan executes the remaining bandits. He feels a brief moment of guilt for taking human lives, but his mind settles when he realizes he just saved future victims from being robbed and murdered. After surviving the wasteland, Turan finally arrives at the city of Mirai. Coming from a tiny mountain village, he is absolutely blown away by the massive architecture and the huge crowds of people. It is a totally new world for him. He tries to ask a local fruit vendor for directions to an inn, but the vendor rudely tells him to get lost if he is not buying anything. Turan quickly learns the unspoken rules of the city and tosses the man a couple of coins. The vendor's attitude instantly changes, and he points Turan toward the biggest pub and inn in town. Inside the lively tavern, Turan is greeted by a beautiful and cheerful inn staff member named Lena. After booking a room, Turan asks her if there are any monsters with bounties nearby, explaining that he needs to hunt them to make money and absorb mana. The whole tavern goes quiet, and a muscular man named Maidan interrupts. Maidan introduces himself as a monster hunter. He explains a crazy local superstition. Ordinary people in the city believe that if they manage to kill a monster, they will magically transform into a wizard. Maidan and his crew are literally hunting deadly beasts just chasing this wild rumor. Noticing Turan's worn-out sling, Maidan assumes Turan is a fellow hunter and invites him to join their party. Turan politely declines, knowing he is already a noble-class wizard and has absolutely no reason to team up with ordinary humans. Do you guys think these regular hunters are going to get themselves killed? Tell me down below. Late at night, Turan is resting in his inn room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process his incredibly chaotic day. He remembers Kjorn's final piece of advice: a city is not automatically safe, and he must never let his guard down. Suddenly, there's a soft knock on his door. The door slowly opens, and Lena, the pretty inn worker from earlier, slips into his room. With a deeply seductive smile, she looks right at Turan and says she thought the room might be cold, so she came to keep him warm. Turan sits up, completely caught off guard and confused by what she means. With the beautiful inn-maid Lena standing in Turan's room in the middle of the night, she drops all pretenses and flat out tells him that for a small amount of money, she will do whatever he wants. She leans in with a seductive smile, but Turan's face is completely deadpan. He asks her what happens if there is nothing he wants. As Lena tries to convince him, Turan suddenly flashes back to a stern warning from his mentor, Kjorn. Kjorn had aggressively warned him to always be careful around inmates because many of them carry diseases. Kjorn taught him to never let momentary desire trap him into doing something he would regret. Taking his mentor's advice to heart, Turan flat out rejects her. Lena awkwardly leaves, and Turan realizes just how cold the city is, where literally everything has a price. Guys, let me ask you, would you have been as disciplined as Turan in this situation, or would you have fallen for the trap? Let me know in the comments. The scene shifts over to Maidan, the muscular monster hunter from the tavern, talking with his crew. His men ask him why he wanted to invite a skinny runt like Turan to join their dangerous hunts. They assume Turan would just be useless monster bait. But Maidan reveals his true colors. He explains that Turan reminds him of his younger self. Seeing a kid going out to hunt with nothing but a worn-out sling made him genuinely worried, and he figured if he kept Turan close, the kid might actually survive a little longer. It turns out Maidan is actually an incredibly pure and kind-hearted guy. The next day, Turan heads to the local city hall to claim a bounty. He runs into an incredibly arrogant official who looks down on him, basically telling him that the world will not be kind to him unless he proves he is a powerful wizard. But the official's smug attitude vanishes instantly when Turan casually drops the fresh corpse of a blade crow right on his desk. The official is absolutely sweating bullets. He cannot believe this random kid managed to hunt such a dangerous monster and bring it back completely intact without it turning into a wraith. What the official does not know is that Turan has been on an absolute rampage. Back at the inn, Turan is stuffing his face with the most expensive food on the menu. Lena is amazed, revealing that Turan has hunted a staggering 30 monsters in just 3 days. He has made an absolute fortune, but Turan thinks to himself that the money is just a bonus. His real goal is absorbing the monster's mana. He looks at his hand, realizing his mana capacity has grown several times larger since he met Kjorn. However, he also realizes he has hit a wall. Absorbing mana from weak, low-level monsters is no longer making him stronger. He needs a real challenge. While Turan is eating, 2 of Maidan's crew members approach him. They're completely jealous of his new wealth and aggressively demand that he give them some charity. Turan does not even blink. He mocks them, and when one of the thugs tries to smash him with a chair, Turan effortlessly blocks it with one hand. In a flash of physical dominance, Turan brutally kicks the guy to the floor. Before things can escalate further, Lena screams at them to stop fighting in her inn. Maidan rushes over and deeply apologizes to Turan for his men's pathetic behavior. He admits that they have been struggling financially and cannot even pay for their room. Surprisingly, Turan drops a bag of coins on the table to cover their debt. When a shocked Maidan asks why, Turan explains that it is repayment for Maidan genuinely worrying about his safety earlier. But Turan makes it clear that nothing is free, demanding information about the next city in exchange. Honestly, guys, Turan paying them back for a simple kind thought shows exactly what kind of noble person he is becoming. Drop a W in the comments for Turan. After getting the information he needs, Turan decides it is time to leave the city and move on to a place with stronger monsters. As he walks through the peaceful forest, thinking about how good of a person Maidan is, he suddenly stops dead in his tracks. His heightened senses pick up a terrifying scent, the smell of fresh blood. Praying his hunch is wrong, Turan sprints through the trees. He bursts into a clearing and finds an absolutely horrifying scene. The ground is torn up from a massive battle, and lying dead in a pool of blood is one of Maidan's crew members. The panels pan over, and Turan's eyes widen in absolute shock. Lying next to the scattered coins is Maidan himself, his face battered, bloody, and lifeless. Turan was staring down in horror, asking, "What in the world happened, Maidan?" Turan kneeling over Maidan's battered and bloody body, Maidan barely manages to choke out a single confusing word, "Rabbit." Before Turan can even process what that means, a terrifying giant rabbit monster launches a lightning-fast ambush from the shadows. Turan barely dodges the strike, completely shocked by its unbelievable speed. He tries to fight back using his sling, but this monster is surprisingly smart. It easily deflects his stones, proving it is used to fighting and killing human hunters. But Turan is not an ordinary hunter. He uses his magic to unleash a concentrated, high-speed blade of wind, slicing the beast completely in half in a single strike. Guys, let me ask you, how embarrassing would it be to get taken out by a giant fluffy rabbit? Let me know in the comments. Turan approaches the dead monster and begins to absorb its mana. Suddenly his eyes widen in pure shock. The amount of mana pouring into him is absolutely massive, far greater than the giant leopard monster he fought in the very first chapter. He realizes just how dangerous the outside world really is. Turan looks back at Maidan and his fallen crew, asking the empty air if they have any family he can send their belongings to, but they are all gone. As he stands there, Turan remembers a conversation they had back at the tavern. Maidan had told him about the great city of Orem, a massive city with a giant library containing thousands of books. Maidan had warned him that only wizards were allowed inside. Knowing he desperately needs more knowledge about the world and magic, Turan decides his next destination. He bids a quiet, emotional farewell to Maidan, hoping the kind-hearted hunter finds peace in the afterlife. Drop an F in the chat for Maidan, guys. He was truly one of the few good people in this cruel world. After a long journey, Turan finally arrives at Orem, and it is absolutely breathtaking. The city is gigantic, but the guards at the gate immediately give him a hard time. They tell him he cannot enter, looking like a filthy beggar, and order him to dust himself off before stepping foot inside. Eventually, he makes his way to the Grand Library. It is a spectacular, towering, building that looks like it was created by magic itself. But when he tries to walk through the front doors, the estate guards block his path, firmly stating that only wizards are allowed inside. Turan calmly looks at them and states that he is a wizard. The guards completely burst out laughing, calling him a lunatic and threatening to kill him for daring to impersonate a noble. Instead of arguing with them, Turan simply releases a fraction of his terrifying mana. Wizards can naturally sense each other's power, and the moment the guard feels Turan's overwhelming energy, he drops to his knees in pure terror, sweating bullets. The guard, a knight named Kenya from House Valtas, realizes he just insulted someone with noble class power or higher. He nervously apologizes and explains that to use the library, Turan needs official permission from the master of House Valtas. While waiting for permission, the estate maids take Turan in to get him cleaned up. The maids are completely blushing and swooning over him. When Turan finally steps out in his new, elegant clothes, he no longer looks like a rugged mountain shepherd. He looks like an absolute prince. He is greeted by a beautiful young noblewoman with pink hair named Azella. She introduces herself and asks which noble house Turan belongs to. Turan politely declines to answer, saying it is for personal reasons. Azella smirks, deciding that if he wants to hide his true identity, she will just have to force it out of him. In a massive display of fiery, explosive magic, she launches a devastating attack straight at Turan right there in the middle of the hallway. And this is where this manhwa ends. This is ongoing, and I have recapped 8 chapter already, given the name and pinned comment, so don't forget to like and subscribe my Jinwoo Manhwa channel.